For the song Guilty as Sin by Taylor Swift, if our only takeaway is that this song is just Taylor fantasizing about Matty Healy, then we would be completely missing the point. Because the bigger story, the central story that Taylor's trying to tell in this song and other songs involving Matty, is not a romantic one. In fact, Matty is only a supporting character in Taylor's story about the longest toxic relationship she's ever had, the one she has with the public. To understand this, we're looking at a 5-song arc from the Torture Poets department, and this is about song number 2 in the series, Guilty as Sin. By the way, I'm Mary, and this is part of my deep dive of the Torture Poets album from the perspective of a songwriter and a former English teacher. When it comes to Guilty as Sin, it's easy to get distracted by the more salacious aspects of this song. But if we focus on what Taylor is actually saying in the lyrics, we'll see that the song is really about her struggle and frustration with being persecuted by the public for her personal life choices. This song is Taylor wrestling with the internal conflict of wanting to do what will make herself happy, but knowing that it will come at the cost of being misunderstood, judged, and maligned by the public. This is one of my favorite songs to talk about because I think it's incredibly well written and well produced. So let's first dive into the lyrics and then we'll talk about the song's significance. The song starts with verse 1. Drowning in the blue Nile, he sent me downtown lights. I hadn't heard it in a while. Here, Taylor accomplishes something both literally and symbolically. Literally, she is setting the scene. The Blue Nile is the name of a band, and Downtown Lights is one of their most popular songs. In a 2016 interview with Vulture, Matty Healy said the Blue Nile is his favorite band of all time, and that their album Hats, which is the album that Downtown Lights is on, is his favorite record and what he considers the best record of the 80s. Based on this, it's a pretty solid guess that Taylor is talking about Matty. Symbolically, in these 3 lines, Taylor is telling us about her emotional state of mind. Drowning in the Blue Nile is a metaphor for the intense grief that she was experiencing after her breakup with Joe. It's a play on words. The Nile is referring to the longest river in the world, the Nile River. Blue is a color Taylor has long associated with Joe, and it has also evolved to refer to the sadness and depression that define the relationship at its end. So drowning in the Blue Nile means she was overcome by sadness. Now, some people interpret this song to be about during Taylor's relationship with Joe, essentially saying that she was emotionally cheating on him with these feelings for someone else that she shares in this song. But Taylor actually makes it very clear in this song, especially in the bridge, that this all takes place after her breakup. And we'll see that when we get to those lyrics. Here in verse 1, line 2, she says, he sent me downtown lights, I hadn't heard it in a while. The song Downtown Lights is a song about longing. When you listen to the lyrics, like, sometimes I walk away when all I really want to do is love and hold you right, the song encapsulates the feeling of yearning and everything that makes a tortured, hopeless romantic. So while Taylor may be telling us literally that he sent her this song that she hadn't heard in a while, what she's telling us symbolically is that a man hadn't made her feel this way in a long time, that it's been a while since she's heard these kinds of words of affection. If you watched my analysis of the song How Did It End, we learned in that song that Taylor experienced a lot of emotional isolation during the breakdown and the eventual breakup of her relationship with Joe. She was isolated in her dying relationship because of the lack of connection and intimacy. Then she was also isolated in her grief after the breakup. So imagine what that must feel like when, in the depths of your heartbreak and loneliness, someone comes and makes you feel seen, cared for, or even desired. And what's more than that, I think the connection that Taylor had with Matty was not just that he may have made her feel good, but that he made her feel understood. This is actually a good time to talk about the personalities of Taylor and Matty so we can understand why they seem to share a meaningful connection. And yes, I do believe that we can get a good idea of who a celebrity is in real life by watching how they consistently show up and express themselves in their music and in conversations over the years. For Taylor and Matty, it's always been evident to me that they're both deeply feeling romantic, dramatic, and poetic individuals, and I think that's one of the keys to understanding their connection. In fact, she mentions in the song The Torture Poets Department when she says, everyone we know understands why it's meant to be. We're both crazy. So here in Guilty as Sin, in just the first 3 lines, Taylor has set the scene for us both literally and emotionally. She shares with us the circumstances and the nature of her connection to Matty, how in the loneliness of her grief, he was there to hold her emotionally. And this is the context for understanding the rest of the song. She continues in line 4. My boredom's bone deep. This cage was once just fine. First, we need to establish that the cage she's talking about is referring to fame and her life as a public figure. She's not referring to her relationship with Joe. I think sometimes it can get confusing because Taylor uses metaphors of imprisonment to refer to both Joe and Fame, but she's actually very consistent in how she distinguishes between the two. When Taylor's talking about her relationship with Joe, she uses the motif of a prison or jail. When she's talking about her relationship with Fame, she uses the motif of a cage. This is a difference that can be seen across multiple albums. So here in lines 4 and 5, Taylor is telling us that she had grown restless with the confinement and restrictions of her life as a public figure, something that she used to deal with just fine. We'll find out exactly what those constraints are later in the song, but here in verse 1, she ends with, "Am I allowed to cry?" This line was such a surprise to me when I first listened to this song, because it's so unexpectedly candid and vulnerable. It stands in stark contrast against the backdrop of a song that's supposedly just about her fantasizing about a man. But Taylor actually goes on to repeat this line and ends the song with it, so we know it's important. To me, "Am I allowed to cry?" is the emotional center of this song. The choice of the word allowed gives the connotation of conflict. What is making her want to cry? What is the internal conflict or turmoil that is about to boil over into tears? Let's find out. We're at line 7, the pre-chorus. "I dream of cracking locks, throwing my lives to the wolves, or the ocean rocks crashing into him tonight." The locks are the locks on her cage. The wolves, similar to her use of vipers in the song But Daddy I Love Him, is referring to the predatory public. Taylor is saying she fantasizes about breaking free from the confines of her cage, from the expectations and the limitations imposed on her by the public, even if doing that means she's throwing herself to the wolves to be ripped apart by their judgment. She also fantasizes about throwing herself onto the ocean rocks, crashing into him tonight, meaning consummating the feelings that were aroused in her in verse 1, even though doing that could also metaphorically kill her. She continues in line 11, "He's a paradox." A paradox is something that seems to contradict itself, but is actually true. By saying he's a paradox, Taylor is acknowledging how Maddie's public persona contradicts with who he actually is as a person. In my opinion, Maddie is very misunderstood, especially by people who may only know him from his connection to Taylor. People can find Maddie offensive because in many ways he's a performance artist who fiercely believes in the freedom of artistic expression. So he almost intentionally comes off casually vulgar and would do or say things that many consider shocking or distasteful. But if we look at the history of his career, his music, the relationship he has with his bandmates, what he has said about his life and his art, and what those close to him have said about him, we actually get the picture of someone who's incredibly self-aware, sentimental, and soft-hearted. In a 2023 profile by The New Yorker, Jack Antonoff, the longtime collaborator and friend to both Maddie and Taylor, had this to say about Maddie. Quote, "I think Maddie is a deeply sincere person who can, at different points, be misunderstood because of how much he enjoys a bit. If you don't know him, if you don't get him, because you're not really tuned into the work, you might assume a cynicism that is literally not there." In short, Maddie Healy is a good guy who puts on a bad guy persona. That's why he's a paradox. So in line 12, as Taylor is seeing visions and fantasizing about him, she asks 3 questions. Am I bad, or mad, or wise? Based on everything she just told us about Maddie and how he makes her feel, there's nothing inherently bad about him. In fact, I would say that their connection was healing for her in a time when she was deeply depressed and lonely. So why would she ask herself, am I bad or crazy? Because let's remember how the public reacted when Taylor and Maddie were first seen together after her breakup with Joe. A lot of the reactions were negative and judgmental. People literally said they were disappointed in her, that she had a problem with men, some even saying they could no longer be her fans. So Taylor is asking herself, am I really a bad person? Am I really crazy? Because that's what the public was projecting onto her. But she also asks, or am I wise? Meaning, wouldn't she be the best person, better than anyone else, to know and trust what her own needs and wants are? Here, we're beginning to see the source of her internal conflict that is driving the emotional center of the song. This is part 2 of my deep dive into the song Guilty as Sin by Taylor Swift, from the perspective of a songwriter and a former English teacher. I'm explaining how Maddie Healy is only a supporting character in Taylor's songs, because the bigger story that she's trying to tell is the one about the longest toxic relationship she's ever had, the one she has with the public. We established so much context in verse 1 and pre-chorus 1. Now we're at chorus 1. Taylor starts in chorus 1. What if he's written mine on my upper thigh, only in my mind? To me, this is actually a tie to the song I'm Gonna Get You Back, but the point here is that it's an elegant metaphor for physical intimacy. Based on what we talked about in the pre-chorus, Taylor is saying here, I haven't done anything with Maddie. What if it's all just a fantasy in my mind? Does that still make me bad or crazy? She continues, one slip and falling back into the hedge maze. A hedge maze is a garden feature that's part of British history and tradition. One of its purposes was that it was used as a place for courtship, where lovers could go for a walk and talk and flirt, or maybe even hook up within the privacy of the hedges. So here in the song, hedge maze is a metaphor for the fun and thrills of casual romance, and also the flirtation that Taylor and Maddie shared from years ago. Taylor is saying one slip. If she doesn't be careful, if she just lets herself go with these feelings and desires, she'll fall right back into the thrills of romance. And in line 4, oh, what a way to die. This line to me is very much in line with Taylor's sense of drama and humor. The way it's phrased gives the impression of someone lamenting with desire. Similar to phrases like, what a guy, or what a life. It gives the connotation of, wouldn't that be nice? So Taylor is saying, if I let myself go with these feelings, I'll pay for it for sure, but man, wouldn't it be a thrill. Line 5. I keep recalling things we never did. Messy top-lip kiss, how I long for our trysts. She's fantasizing about him, but more importantly, she's letting us know that she and Maddie never actually did anything. They were not having a physical relationship. That's why she ends the chorus with, without ever touching his skin, how can I be guilty as sin? Meaning the public was fundamentally misunderstanding the nature of their connection. It was not a physical one. Yet, the public was criticizing and condemning her as if she had committed a sin and done the worst thing. We need to understand that this hits a particular pain point for Taylor, because at her core, she strives to be and be seen as a good person, like most of us. In her 2020 documentary, Miss Americana, Taylor says, quote, my entire moral code, as a kid and now, is a need to be thought of as good. The main thing that I always tried to be was a good girl. I have so much empathy for Taylor because when that is your belief system, it can be devastating when what feels like the entire world is telling you you're a bad person, especially when it's undeserved. That's why the unjustified backlash that she experienced during the Kim and Kanye drama was so painful for her. And I think it's why this time around, the public's criticism of her post-breakup with Joe brought up those familiar, painful feelings. And we'll see in other songs on this album how her frustration with this will eventually boil over into anger and rebellion. Let's continue with verse 2. I keep these longings locked in lower case inside a vault. This is another example of Taylor's wonderful use of imagery. She's saying she keeps her feelings and desires to herself, small and quiet and locked away. Line 3. Someone told me there's no such thing as bad thoughts, only your actions talk. The irony here is that that's not Taylor's reality. She was being judged, even though she was not committing anything in action with Maddie. Taylor continues in pre-chorus 2. These fatal fantasies, giving way to labored breath, taking all of me, we've already done it in my head. She's getting more explicit in her fantasies. In the production, there's a cymbal crash that happens when she says, we've already done it in my head. I find it hilarious and appropriate because it's like putting exclamation marks on a line that she knew the audience was going to find shocking and scandalous. Then she says in line 10, if it's make-believe, why does it feel like a vow will both uphold somehow? To me, this is Taylor saying that her connection with Maddie feels so strong that it could genuinely lead to something real. Taylor then goes into chorus 2 with the same 4 lines as chorus 1, but changes it up for the second half. Line 5. My bedsheets are ablaze, I've screamed his name, building up like waves, crashing over my grave. There's actually so much I can say about this song and eroticism in religious iconography, but that's a whole other conversation. For now, let's just say that this is a beautiful and a poetic way to describe an orgasm. And I love how when you look at the progression of this song, this climax happens in chorus 2, which is usually the height of a song before it goes into a bridge. So from the beginning of the song to this point, we're seeing this synchronized build-up, lyrically and sonically, to this metaphorical climax. It's such good songwriting. This brings us to the bridge, where Taylor commits to a religious metaphor for the entire section, starting with, what if I roll the stone away? Rolling the stone away is a long-standing symbolism in Christianity for freeing someone from death. Because first-century tombs were sealed with stone, and important Bible stories talk about the tombstone being rolled away before someone was raised from the dead. What Taylor implies here is that the breakup with Joe was a death for her, and she was entombed in grief. This is consistent with the metaphor of death that she's used in songs to describe the end of the relationship, like You're Losing Me or So Long London. This grief is also what she mentioned at the beginning of the song when she said she was drowning in the Blue Nile. So here in line 1 of the bridge, she's asking, what if I roll the stone away? What if I don't stay dead emotionally or socially? What if I choose to find new life after the death of this relationship? Because line 2, they're gonna crucify me anyway. Meaning the public is going to criticize and judge me no matter what I do. And it's this line that tells us that the risk of death that she's talking about in this entire song is the condemnation she's afraid of suffering at the hands of the public. The public are the wolves that she mentioned earlier. The public is what makes these fantasies fatal and potentially deadly. And the public is the one who has convicted her of being guilty as sin. This is why I say Maddie is only a supporting character in Taylor's story, because the emotional center of this song, the anxiety and the turmoil, really has nothing to do with him, but everything to do with Taylor's relationship with the public. She continues in the bridge, what if the way you hold me, you meaning Maddie, is actually what's holy? If long-suffering propriety is what they want from me, they don't know how you've haunted me so stunningly. Long-suffering means the willingness to endure pain for a long time. Taylor is saying that's the public's expectation of her, that they want her to be buried alone in her grief because that's what the public has decided is appropriate. This actually reflects the feelings of dehumanization that she talks about in the song How Did It End? The public is so apathetic to her actual experience and sadness. So here in the bridge, Taylor is pondering, what if this connection with Maddie is actually what's good and healing for me? The public is imposing on me their idea of propriety and how they think I should deal with my heartbreak. But they don't know the real history and connection we share that actually has been wonderful for me. Taylor is being made to choose between the approval of the public versus what would actually make her happy. And she makes that choice at the end of the bridge with the line, I choose you and me religiously. There's something that stands out to me about Taylor's use of religious metaphors in this song, and it has to do with Joe Alwyn. Taylor frequently used religious metaphors to write about her relationship with Joe. In the song Cornelia Street, Taylor described the relationship as sacred new beginnings that became my religion. Joe was everything to her, and she dedicated herself to that relationship. So when she says in the bridge, what if the way you hold me, meaning Maddie, is actually what's holy? It reminds me of how disillusioned she felt at the end of her relationship with Joe. She wrote extensively across multiple albums about how the person who she thought loved me for me actually made her feel deeply insecure and turned me into an idea of sorts. How the person who made her feel safe and threw blankets over my barbed wire actually made her feel scared every day of a love affair. And how the love that she thought was endgame was actually fake and counterfeit. Yet, many people continue to idealize Joe as the perfect partner when she has made it very clear that their relationship was toxic and that he was someone who took her to hell. Ironically, the person who ends up giving her the connection that she was starving for, the one who sent her downtown lights and made her feel what she hadn't in a while, was the one the public widely ridiculed and persecuted her for. This is why she ends the song with, Am I Allowed to Cry? This is the bigger story. It's Taylor's frustration with the way the public imposes on her personal life, of making her choose between their approval and her own happiness.